You're listening to the Perth Property Show, Australia's only weekly property podcast by West Australian experts for West Australian listeners. Catch your latest episode every Monday at 7 a.m.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Perth Property Show. My name's Trent Fleskens, your host as always. And this week I thought I would take pause for a second after the federal election over the weekend. It's no surprise the results have turned out the way they have, and what that means is another 3 years of a lot of immigration, of some attempts at fixing our housing crisis, and as we know, through the goodie bags being thrown out by both parties at the end of the day in the housing space, more fuel on the fire on the demand side as well, with an extension of the 5% deposit scheme. All in all, it doesn't really bode well for fixing our housing crisis at a federal level, at least, although some inroads, small I must say, are being made at a state level. And it will be another 2 weeks until we get some more really serious news coming in that will affect house prices, which will be the May interest rate decision. Most people expecting at least a 25 basis point reduction, some even thinking it will be a 50 basis point reduction, all of which will increase serviceability for prospective buyers and therefore push up house prices, given demand continues to outstrip supply in most price points and most suburbs in Western Australia. But before that, we'll have a couple of conversations with some heavy hitters in the game. We've got Megan Adair coming up, we've got Sam Carello coming up, Tim Reardon from HIA, and also Michael McGowan, Executive Director of the HIA. All of these guys coming up over the next few weeks, which gives me 1 week to reflect on my Easter break, which I hope will be of a lot of interest to people in the property game, building game, because I spent that time with my wife in Foshan, China. And the reason I was there was not for a holiday, it was definitely a personal working holiday. I am currently owner building my family home in North Perth and looked at the potential prices I was going to be paying for my house and thought, I think I can do a better job here, not only from a financial fidelity position, with obviously a lot of builders still continuing to go under at the moment, but also a scheduling, quality control, and most importantly, cost perspective. Now, one of the big factors in managing that obviously includes looking to source as many products as I can that are all already made in China, directly from China, cutting out that middleman in Osborne Park or Welsh Pool or wherever they're holding up my tiles, my toilets, my faucets, my furniture, and saying, hey, all this stuff's already there. I'm going straight to the source and seeing what prices look like, what the choice looks like as well. So I thought I would detail over the next maybe 15-20 minutes what my experience was, because I've had quite a few people call me since I flagged that on the radio last week. And if it can add some value to anyone on this podcast who are looking to build their own home or do a renovation and looking at the budget and really seeing that not stack up, then it will be worthwhile. So the first thing I guess I can talk about is how I came about making that connection. I was lucky enough to be introduced via Facebook Messenger on a Facebook group to a Chinese sourcing agent, a lovely lady named Amy, who is fluent in English and also in Cantonese. And it was that connection that really kickstarted our decision to make that journey over to Foshan, an hour out of Guangzhou in China, pretty close to Macau and Hong Kong for those listening, to go straight to the equivalent of your Malaga, your Osborne Park in China, where all this stuff is made for the whole world, to go and get there and start shopping essentially for 8 days. So we took flights through Singapore to Guangzhou, an hour drive out to Foshan, and just holed up there in a hotel for 9 nights. And we're on our feet really from 9 a.m. till 8 p.m. for 8 days straight, going and inspecting, sourcing, specifying and negotiating a whole bunch of products. Now, it's an interesting part of the world, obviously. China is one that is always on the news with regards to the geopolitical space with us. But what I can tell you is it's a very peaceful place, a very calm place for the most part. The road networks are extremely clean and well put together, and most of the cars there, I'd say at least 75% of the cars, are now EVs. All of the Vespa scooters that you would see around Vietnam and Bali, they're all EV as well. So quite a quiet roadscape when you compare it to a lot of Southeast Asia. But to put that aside, and the relatively strange food that was on offer for the most part, it was an experience like no other that we've had, and it was certainly a successful one. We were over there to find things like large format slab tiles. Now, in Perth, you've got a few options in Osborne Park where most of the slab tiles will go to 2.4 metres high. We were looking for larger than that. We ended up sourcing them at 2.78 metres high by 1.2 metres. And there were two factors that I guess are a theme here across the whole episode, and that is the exceptional amount of choice compared to Perth. Perth, you'll have a dozen or so options for a slab tile in most tile places. And if you're looking to buy anything of real quality that isn't a standard white or a standard grey, you can be paying $400, $500, $600, $700 a square metre for tiles. We were straight there on day one in what is essentially the tile carousel, the tile galleria, if you can imagine that, where every single store was selling essentially tiles. And the choice was immense. The craftsmanship was like no other, and whilst we took a bunch of samples across from our Perth-based interior designer to try and match, which we did very successfully within the day, we then were confronted with the issue of choice in that we had so many more options than the ones that were presented to our interior designer in the first place that we went one up on that with not only our tiles but a number of the products we were after. So whilst I referenced there the tiles, the specific ones we were after in Perth would have cost $540 a square metre, we ended up negotiating brand new tiles that have never been laid anywhere around the world yet that we thought were a better choice than the ones we were going to choose in Perth for $100 a square metre. Essentially an 80% plus discount on a line item that would have been, for us, over $100,000 in cost, ended up being around $26,000. That was a big saving in itself already. We then went across to the next supermarket, the next department store shopping mall, and that was the baths and faucets area. And to be frank, there are a few of these around town amongst the 8 million people that live there. And again, wall-to-wall shops of just baths, taps, sinks, and the types of taps we were after, they were available on your online stores in Australia, like your ABI Interiors, your buildmat.coms, for around $650 for a tap set, the specific ones we were after. And we found ones that were actually even nicer for $150 per tap set over in Foshan. And again, the experience is you go to a store that looks just like one you would see in Osborne Park, and the choice is immense. Instead of having 7 or 8 options or 10 or 15 options, you've got 100 options of different taps for different applications, of different choices, and you can even ask them to modify the sets. Can you put this tap with this knob? Can you make this a mixer? Can you add this to this? They're happy to do all of it. Can you match this color? They'll do it for a big enough order. Again, prices down at about 25% of what we would have paid in Perth. And then it extends to things like toilets. We were looking at toilets in Perth. Wall-hung ones were about $1,500. The smart AI wall-hung ones were about $4,000. We picked them up for $500 and $1,000 respectively. Again, about that 30-something% mark of the Australian cost. It really starts to add up. We then moved over to a line item that is expensive in every house, and that is the cabinetry side of things. Now, we have an extensive amount of cabinetry in the house that we're building, and I understand that the prices there would be higher than most. Again, what I can tell you about the experience is there are a number of shopping centres where it was just cabinet makers who have got all of the colours, all the materials you wouldn't have even seen in Australia yet that prevent fingerprints and that are more sturdy, more wear-proof, but also choices of veneers and things that you just wouldn't have seen in Perth. Metallics, acrylics, plastic-based materials that are just out of this world and are years away from probably getting to Perth. The level of detail provided by these cabinet stores is really phenomenal. You really don't have that choice in Perth. The cabinet makers normally just deal directly with the builder. They build what is designed on a 2D plan and away you go. In China, they will sit down with you over days and days if required. They will draw out every single cabinet and specify every single material, and also provide for the accessories that you see really just coming out now in Perth in every single drawer and every single kitchen. Accessories that we'll probably see in the main in 5 to 10 years in Perth are the standard in China. And when I mean accessories, it's all of the things that you would see at a company like Hafele in Osborne Park on Scarborough Beach Road. This is just standard now in China. You wouldn't build cabinets without it. All of this stuff extremely expensive in Australia. Again, we were at about 65-70% off of Australian prices to get all of this built and designed for us in 3D models and 3D photo level renders. so that we can double check what we are designing. Now, we then moved on to our steel fabrication. We've got a staircase that had been priced in Perth. That was for over $100,000, a spiral steel staircase. We were driven straight out to the manufacturer, like going out to, I guess, industrial place in Welshpool, where they're actually fabricating steel staircases there. Welding sparks are going everywhere, and we achieved exactly the same as what we would have achieved being put together in Australia with the steel made in China for around $30,000. The balustrading, again, any choice we wanted, it was all there, far cheaper than in Australia. And I guess when you start to think about these larger items, you start to think, how are we going to get it across? Now, the reason most people aren't sourcing out of China is not just because obviously there's a language barrier or a cultural barrier or an access barrier. It's also because you probably won't justify sending one thing over, because you'll normally be putting this stuff in a shipping container, just like a wholesaler would. They'd buy 1,000 tiles or 100 baths or toilets and bring them all over and amortize that shipping cost. Now, given we're pulling together a lot of the cabinetry and fixtures in our house, it allows for us to fill a couple of 40-foot containers. And even if you add in a few $1,000s, it costs to bring the shipping containers across to Perth. As you can probably have already noticed from the prices and the cost saved, it really is rounding numbers on that side of things. And then it really comes down to the question, how do we get it from the stores over to Australia? And that's again where this translator, this consolidation service comes into play. We were provided with a translator who was there for us from dusk till dawn for 8 days straight. These people not only helped translate, they helped to negotiate, and negotiation's a big part of that Cantonese culture. Every single price probably came down about 40% from where it was initially quoted, and that is just something that's probably not part of our culture and something we aren't normally used to, is negotiating to that level. But once all this product is specified, agreed on, the price is agreed on, we put a small deposit down depending on what we're looking to buy, and that gets them making the product. And when they're done, that same service then goes and inspects the product, takes videos, photos for us. We pay the full price. That product then gets freighted to a consolidation depot at the local port in Foshan. And when it's all ready, it all goes on the shipping containers together. Now, the next thing we looked at was products like furniture, living room sofa sets, dining table sets, bed sets, recliners, rugs, all those things. And that was a little bit harder for us to ascertain value. We went to a couple of large, again, department store locations where often it would actually look like the prices were more expensive than those in Perth. And it took probably a week of searching around to find the right stores in the right locations to eventually see value for money. Now, again, there's two factors here. One, it was value for money, where I'd say we were probably saving about 40%, so not as much as the other products I spoke about on the furniture. But the bigger part here was the customization. In Perth, you probably have an option to go with 4 or 5 colors. You've got your fabric, your leather, and hopefully you can agree on one of those and they can ameliorate into your design perspectives. In China, you go to a showroom for a furniture store, and again, there's hundreds with choice everywhere, very peculiar styles, all the way to the stuff you would see in showrooms in Osborne Park. And the choice is immense on fabrics, on leathers, over 100 leather choices in terms of colors and grades. Fabrics was the same, and you really do want to make sure that you come to China with a great understanding from an interior designer in Perth about what it is you're after, and then you simply try and match those samples that you would bring across, and invariably that happened within a few minutes of a conversation in a showroom. So it was things like cinema recliners, sofas, dining sets, and we found that most of those products we could find at a price that was worth us picking up. Probably the one thing we didn't see value in, that was timber flooring. A lot of the timber flooring we've been looking at actually comes from Australian timber. It made sense for us to source directly from Australia in that case, although I do understand that some veneers and oaks that are more international products may have been more cost effective. Finally, we looked at things like curtains. We looked at things like doors and door frames, and again, choice was immense, service was immense, customization was outstanding, and savings there were at least 50% as well. So I guess the value I wanted to bring to this episode was just to provide people with a little bit of context from someone you hopefully listen to on a regular basis, that someone from Perth, and I'm not the only person, there's many, but someone from Perth has gone over to China, tested it out, came back alive, came back very happy and fulfilled after a very busy 9 nights working from dawn till dusk, and it is a possibility there. If you're looking at starting your own owner build or your own renovation, or even working with a builder and maybe sourcing some of your own products, the scale of opportunities you have there, if you want to go and take a bit of a punt and crack over there, certainly was worth the cost of the flights and the accommodation, which is really not that expensive in the grand scheme of things. And maybe the difference for you to get your family's dream home put together at the specification and quality level that you were after. And certainly quality was not an issue when we were looking at the products that we've sourced, and especially if it's going to be a long-term investment for you as well. Now, the list could have gone on. We were working up until an hour and a half before we drove to the airport on all of this, and could have kept going for a few more days. There were things like rugs, patios and kitchen appliances we could have kept going on, and we may still, now that we've got those connections as well. Now, what are the risks? Obviously, I've spent 20 minutes having a conversation about the positives and how successful that venture seems to have been. The risks are staring you in the face when you think about going over to China in the first place. There certainly didn't seem to be any travel risks or geopolitical risks. We had no issues with regards to safety being over there. Food was a little bit tough to get around on. Everything's in Chinese language over there with regards to the menus, and I guess the palette is a little bit different over there as well. Quality is something that I guess is a little harder to feel like you can control with regards to warranties, but you really can interrogate massive showrooms to see the level of work that is done, and you can even go to the factories, which is the sort of thing you don't even do in Perth, let's be frank. And I guess what you want to do is, given the discount that you are receiving going over there, if you're buying a large quantity of certain products, maybe just seek to have a little bit of extra over, a little bit of fat in the quantities for things like breakage, things like quality control on certain products like tiles, for example. Those are the things that we brought in, and I certainly wouldn't be going over there without a translator. A translation service was absolutely required. I'd say that 90% of the showroom salespeople that we were speaking to, or fabricators we were speaking to, had very little English skills at all past hello, how are you, good day. A translator is imperative. Anyone listening who was thinking about it but wouldn't know where to start, I'm happy to provide those details as well. Let's talk about finance. Now, it's a little bit different over in China. In fact, it's a lot different over in China. I think anyone who's traveled in the last 5 years internationally would note that they can probably get around 90% of the places with their Visa, with their MasterCard. Cash isn't super important, and certainly anytime you're looking to buy something, there's a FPOS machine or tap and pay machine where you're essentially good, plus an international transaction fee. Now, China's a bit different. Nearly all of the places we went to, and we were pre-warned about this, don't accept Visa or MasterCard or Amex. In fact, they don't have point-of-sale terminals like you would see in the rest of the world, to be frank, even Southeast Asia and Japan. China's very different there. I'd say 99% of the vendors there, they are taking payment through Alipay, which is an AliExpress, Alibaba payment system. It's essentially scan a QR code and get their details and pop the payment amount in, press pay, and then show the vendor that you've just paid them. Or through WeChat's pay system, which is WePay. Now, WeChat is essentially a Chinese version of WhatsApp. They all use it, and it's very handy, to be frank. It does a lot of things other than being used as a chat and payment system, but it is their main form of payment. So you need to download the apps WeChat or WePay, as well as Alipay, which also helps you book things like a DD over there or a ride share over there as well. Many things you can do on these apps, but what you can't do is pay through your Visa or MasterCard. Now, we ended up buying most of these products with a deposit, as I've said, and where we weren't able to pay via Alipay or WePay, given we were getting rejected a lot by our bank security and verification systems, we then have transferred money directly to the Australian bank accounts of our translator and agents company. Now, it was a bit hairy sometimes and quite frustrating as well, trying to make payments to these legitimate businesses in their showrooms and get deposits locked down at the prices they were at. But we eventually got there one way or another. But all I would say is don't bother bringing cash for it. Don't rely on your MasterCard or Visa, and certainly not Amex. You're going to have to download Alipay and WePay. and see how far you get with that. So guys, that's a quick one on sourcing in China. I could have gone for another 20 minutes, but I thought let's have some succinct data and stats on exactly what we're buying over there, why you would go over there, whether it was worth it, and what sort of money you might be able to save on your house. Thanks for listening. As I said, next week we'll be checking in with Michael McGowan from the HIA to have a chat about how our building in WA is going.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Perth Property Show. If you've only just joined the conversation, you can catch up by heading over to our website, perthpropertyshow.com.au, subscribing to the podcast, or joining our Facebook page. Don't forget to tune in next Monday at 7 a.m. for more expert insights, local analysis, and suburb spotlights. Happy hunting!